But part of it is collecting data and more data so that we can make these connections and correlations and assessments, I would assume.
Absolutely. I mean, there are projects, and the NIH has a project, the 1,000 Genome Project, which, if you talk to the scientists there, they don't want to say this out loud, but they want to ultimately migrate that to the Million Genome Project and do these very powerful analyses, including looking at networks of genes and how they relate to networks of diseases. And we will find very powerful connections between genes and our biology. And we do need a lot of data to do that.
I'm wondering if you explored the use of mesenchymal stem cells, and not so much the stem cells, but the growth factors that are produced by the stem cells as really important tools for rejuvenation and repair.
Yeah, well, I'm an advisor to stem cell therapies. We have a skin cream called Signals that actually has these signaling factors, which are peptides. Peptides can have an influence on gene expression. So these peptides actually stimulate your natural adult skin stem cells to rejuvenate the skin. And we've done some tests, but I've informally given it to models and used it myself, and it is successful in getting rid of fine lines and so on. So, and there are many products like this that are coming to market. I mean, a very important part of the genetic machinery is the epigenetic machinery that controls gene expression, because every one of our cells has the same genes, yet obviously a heart cell is different from a skin cell and different from a bone cell. That's controlled by these epigenetic factors, which are peptides and small RNA molecules, and we're learning that machinery as well. And we're using computer modeling to do that, and all of that technology is progressing at an exponential rate. These technologies will be 1,000 times more powerful in a decade. So it's not like nothing happens and then suddenly we have everything, but I would say 15 years from now, certainly within 20, it'll be a very different era in our being able to completely reprogram this outdated software. And that's only bridge 2. Bridge 3 is to go beyond biology, not to be limited to biology, because even if we perfect biology and we correct all of these compromises that are in our genetic code, we know they're there because our genes were not evolved for us to live very long. In fact, it was a bad idea for the species for people to live a long time, because then they're going to use up the food of the tribe. It's better that they die at 23, which is in fact what happened 1,000 years ago. And that's what our genetic program is. But even if we perfect that, biology is limited. It's all based on proteins. Proteins are they're a very impressive group of molecules, but they're limited. And ultimately, with nanotechnology, we can go far beyond biology. So, a quintessential application, I used to call it the killer app, but that's such a good idea. It's nanobots in the bloodstream to keep us healthy. There are already dozens of experiments of using blood cell-sized devices that are nano-engineered, like these spherical nano devices that have 7 nanometer pores that let insulin out controlled fashion, that were able to cure diabetes in rats. So there are many interesting experiments. The golden era of, ultimately, I think a very exciting application would be basically robotic white blood cells. I've actually watched my own white blood cells in a microscope, and they showed intelligence. They detected a bacteria. They then actually set up kind of a cordon of blockages, and the bacteria couldn't escape, and they finally trapped it and killed it. But that took like an hour and a half. It was actually a boring thing to watch. They were very slow, but they were intelligent. But they're slow, and they also suffer from some problems. Our immune system doesn't recognize cancer as an enemy because it has your DNA, so it thinks it's you. And it sometimes can turn on us. That's autoimmune disorders. So we can actually create synthetic immune system cells that are much faster, much stronger, can download new software against new pathogens, would be effective against cancer, would avoid autoimmune disorders. So that's just one example. In my vision, ultimately, these will go inside the brain and put our brains out on the internet, be able to access cloud computing, and that's the future. And if that sounds very fantastic, I'd point out there are people with computers in their bodies already that are connected into the brain, Parkinson's patients or cochlear implants, and there are a dozen other ones that are being developed experimentally, retinal implants. So we're at the very early stages of that, but that's bridge 3. Ultimately, if you talk about artificial intelligence and then people say, oh, well, maybe it'll turn on us, it'll be a Terminator scenario, my answer is we're going to merge with these technologies. We're going to put them inside ourselves, make ourselves more durable, healthier, smarter. That's what we do already. This is not in my body and brain yet, but it may as well be. It is part of who I am. I feel actually incomplete without it. It does make me smarter. And it's also very democratically organized. You know, almost everybody has one of these devices. Half the farmers in China have them. A kid with a smartphone in Africa has access to more information than the president of the United States had 15 years ago. So it's already making us a smarter civilization.
Now, it seems that some people believe that Moore's law will eventually phase out and not be applicable, at least to its computing predicting ability. And it's been present for 40 years or so.
Well, let me address that, because
if the second part of the question is to address that, but then it sounds like you believe that nanotechnology may be one of the most exciting innovations in anti-aging, and I'm wondering if you think the Moore's law impact on that would be, I guess, plateau out or have a less significant impact in the future.
Well, I'm not talking about Moore's law per se. I'm talking about what I call the law of accelerating returns, okay, of which Moore's law is one example of many.
Okay.
And what we find in a particular technology like computing is that there's a paradigm that brings exponential growth, and that paradigm ultimately does run out of steam. It creates research pressure to create the next paradigm. And Moore's law was not the first. It was the 5th paradigm to bring exponential growth to computing. The exponential growth of computing started decades before Gordon Moore was even born. It started with the 1890 census, and it went through several paradigms. The 3rd paradigm was vacuum tubes. In the 1950s, there were shrinking vacuum tubes, making them smaller and smaller every year. I have a museum, and I have a computer with little vacuum tubes. Finally, they couldn't shrink them anymore and keep the vacuum, and that was the end of that paradigm. But it was not the end of the exponential growth of computing. We then went to transistors and then to chips and Moore's law. And originally Gordon Moore said Moore's law would end in 2002. Intel now says 2022. But they also say that before that time, by the teen years, they will move on to the 6th paradigm, go beyond Moore's law, with 3-dimensional self-organizing molecular circuits. That's the paradigm beyond Moore's law. So this is not all Moore's law. Moore's law has been a very powerful example. It has gone on, as you say, for 40 years. And it will come to an end, but that's not going to be the end of the exponential growth of computing. And we see examples of exponential growth in information technologies that are not related to Moore's law, which has to do with finer and finer features on an integrated circuit. Magnetic data storage has the same phenomena, or the number of bits we move around. Going back a century, perfectly smooth exponential growth, starting with Morse code over AM radio, where we would measure thousands of bits a month, to 4G networks today. But it's amazing how smooth a progression that is. If you read the news, there's all kinds of drama with companies going bankrupt and competition and new standards coming in and countries dumping products on another, and you would think it would be very erratic. It's amazing, out of all that chaos, not to mention wars and recessions, is a very smooth progression. And it affects genetic sequencing, which is also not Moore's law. I mean, it was affected by computing, but there were other technologies that progressed exponentially. And yes, nanotechnology is a very powerful longevity technology, but so is biotechnology. artificial intelligence will be very important because we're going to put that in devices that we put inside our bodies. There's an experimental computerized pancreas that has the intelligence of your pancreas, and we're putting AI into devices that will keep us healthy. So, I mean, there's three big revolutions which are guided by information technology. Sometimes goes by the letter G and R. G stands for genetics, which really refers to this whole broad area of biotechnology. What we were talking about in terms of reprogramming our biology is an information process. N is nanotechnology. R stands for robotics. It's really referring to artificial intelligence. All of these have profound implications for the future of our species, most notably in our longevity, but are also, I mean, in addition to radical life extension, I believe we'll have radical life expansion because we're going to make ourselves greater. We'll be able to inhabit fantastic virtual reality environments. We'll be able to make ourselves smarter. I believe we're already doing that, but ultimately we will very literally merge with these technologies. So people say, I don't know if I want to live hundreds of years. First of all, they're imagining, I don't want to be a 95-year-old, what I imagine a 95-year-old to be for 400 years. That's, of course, not what we're talking about. We're talking about really being like a 35-year-old. And then people say, well, I'm not sure I want to be a 35-year-old for 500 years. That's going to be pretty boring, doing the same things over and over again. And actually, they're right. It would be if it weren't for the fact that we're going to greatly expand our horizons as well. Human knowledge is doubling every 13 months by certain measures. And